Utah's compulsory education law requires parents enroll their children in school. As caretakers of these children, local education agencies have a legal and ethical obligation to create safe and healthy learning environments. The purpose of this training is to provide staff members with information to protect themselves and students from the consequences of failing to maintain appropriate boundaries between themselves and the students. This training addresses a wide range of behaviors and interactions between staff and students, from obviously unlawful or unethical interactions to less obvious boundary-blurring behaviors that undermine the professional staff-student relationship and can lead to misconduct or create the appearance of impropriety. School staff members are expected to provide students with appropriate guidance, direction, understanding, and support in a professional manner while acting within accepted standards of conduct. Establishing and maintaining appropriate personal boundaries for staff-student relationships are key to successfully achieving this. Whether driving a bus, instructing in a classroom, passing in the hallway, assisting at an extracurricular activity, or serving meals in the cafeteria, appropriate personal boundaries between staff members and students must be maintained. Clearly identifying risky behaviors that may lead to inappropriate relationships is the first step in protecting students and staff. Every staff member must establish strong boundaries, stay within those boundaries, and intervene and report when observing others crossing boundaries. The negative consequences of a staff member violating the boundaries of the staff-student relationship are far-reaching. A student's perspective of appropriate staff-student relationships and trust in adults is compromised. Parent and community trust in school staff and the education system as a whole is damaged. Coworkers are impacted by the negative publicity and discord resulting from a peer's inappropriate conduct. Liability for the resulting harm to a student may be placed on the organization and the staff member responsible for the misconduct. And last, the staff member may face disciplinary action or termination from employment, licensure action if a licensed educator, and criminal charges depending on the nature of the violation. Utah State Board of Education Administrative Rules mandates every local education agency, which means each school district or charter school, establish a code of conduct applicable to all staff members working in public schools in Utah. The term staff members includes professional staff, support staff, part-time, full-time, permanent, temporary, provisional, contract, and even volunteers who spend substantial unsupervised time alone with students. The Code of Conduct requires every staff member avoid boundary violations with students. Never subject a student to abuse, physical, mental, emotional, or sexual. Communicate with students in a professional manner, regardless of when, where, or how it takes place. Electronic communications and the use of social media must follow local education agency policy and be used for education-related purposes. Never touch a student in a way that makes a reasonably objective student feel uncomfortable. Never discriminate against a student based on race, religion, gender, disability, national origin, gender identity, sexual orientation, or other protected class or characteristics. Never use or be under the influence of alcohol or illegal substances during work hours at a school activity or on school property. Never use tobacco products on school property or at a school activity. Finally, staff members have a legal obligation under state statute, this administrative rule, and the local education agency code of conduct policy to report suspected violations of this policy or of suspected abuse or neglect. A local education agency's local code of conduct may include stricter or more detailed requirements, but must include the provisions outlined in this presentation. Each of us as individuals sees the world around us in our own unique way. We interpret the events around us, the acts of others, and even our own actions in light of our individual set of experiences. For example, one teacher accused of inappropriately touching students responded, "I didn't do anything wrong. I came from a really touchy-feely family. That's just how I am." A coworker offended by and concerned with a teacher's actions reported the employee's conduct to an administrator. The coworker had obviously developed a very different standard of appropriate personal space between a staff member and a student. From his perspective, hands off entirely should be the rule. So which interpretation of appropriate should we rely on? How do we define where to draw the line? Some actions are clearly identified in laws, rules, and policies. However, where a specific action is not clearly identified, appropriate boundaries for personal interactions between staff and students must be based on common, acceptable, safe, healthy, and productive standards. Personal standards of what is acceptable, such as the touchy-feely standard, must be set aside. In the school setting, the established code of conduct must be strictly adhered to, and the actions of every staff member will be judged by a reasonable education employee standard. In determining whether a person acted appropriately in a given situation, courts have adopted the reasonably prudent person standard. Increasingly, courts are moving toward the adoption of a standard for educators that requires them to provide a level of care based on factors such as age, training, education, and experience. Put another way, under the reasonable education employee standard, courts ordinarily expect teachers and other school staff to provide a higher duty of care than the reasonable person, who are not working in the public school system, but less than the degree of care that reasonable parents might perform. So the standard to measure conduct in the school setting will be that of what a reasonable education employee would view as acceptable in the particular circumstance.